The darkest hour. The swarm of Seraphim vessels filled the view screen like a living constellation of death. Captain Nora Hayes watched through narrowed eyes, her weathered face illuminated by the harsh glow of emergency lighting. The bridge of the ESS Defiant, Earth's last operational defense vessel, had fallen silent as the crew absorbed the impossible odds facing them. "Status report," Hayes demanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "Seraphim vessels number approximately 15,000, replied Lieutenant Commander Takeda, his fingers dancing across holographic displays. "They've already breached the outer defensive perimeter. Colonies on Europa and Titan have gone dark." Hayes nodded grimly. The Seraphim had appeared 6 months ago, a vast collective intelligence housed in biomechanical vessels that consumed everything in their path. Not just destroying, but absorbing matter, energy, and data into their ever-expanding neural network. 3 billion humans had already perished. The remaining colonies were scattered, desperate, and losing hope. "The Galactic Council transmission is coming through," announced Communications Officer Chen, her voice tight with barely contained frustration. The main display flickered, revealing a panel of alien representatives, the so-called leaders of galactic civilization. At the center sat High Counselor Zex Trull, his crystalline body pulsing with condescending colors. "Captain Hayes," the alien's translated voice reverberated through the bridge. "We have reviewed your species' request for military assistance. The Council has unanimously declined." Hayes's knuckles whitened as she gripped the command console. "Counselor, the Seraphim aren't just threatening Earth. If they consume our technology and knowledge, they'll become exponentially more dangerous to the entire galaxy. Your technology is primitive at best," Zex Trull dismissed with a wave of his crystalline appendage. "The Council has calculated that containment within your solar system is the most prudent course of action. The quarantine fleet has been dispatched." The transmission ended abruptly. Several officers cursed under their breath. "They're going to blockade us in with those things," muttered Tactical Officer Jackson. "They're using us as bait to buy themselves time." Hayes's eyes hardened. "Then we'll have to solve this ourselves. Where is Dr. Patel now?" "Research Lab Delta," Takeda replied. "He says he's made a breakthrough in understanding the Seraphim communication structure. Tell him I'm on my way." Research Lab Delta was barely recognizable as a scientific facility. Equipment had been salvaged from a dozen different outposts, creating a chaotic maze of technology. In the center stood Dr. Elijah Patel, his disheveled appearance matching the disarray around him. "Captain, you need to see this," he said without preamble, gesturing to a complex holographic model pulsing with data streams. "The Seraphim aren't just a hive mind. They're a distributed neural network unlike anything we've encountered." Hayes studied the display, watching as information flowed between countless nodes. "Explain it simply, Doctor." "They think collectively. A single consciousness spread across thousands of vessels," Paddle explained, his eyes alight with discovery. "But here's the critical part. Their neural communication isn't instantaneous. It propagates like a wave, and that creates microscopic vulnerabilities." "Vulnerabilities we can exploit." "Yes, but not with conventional weapons," Paddle replied. "I've been analyzing the data from our previous encounters. The Seraphim process information through feedback loops, almost like biological systems, if we introduce the right kind of cognitive dissonance into their network. We could disrupt their entire collective." Hayes finished, understanding dawning. "How quickly can you develop a delivery system? That's the problem. The disruptor would need to be deployed directly into a primary command node. It's a suicide mission." Hayes's expression hardened. "Not if we assemble the right team. Get me everything you need. I'm putting together Operation Firestorm." Within hours, Hayes had requisitioned the last stealth courier in Earth's arsenal, a vessel designated Shadow Blade. Small, fast, and virtually undetectable, it was their only hope of penetrating the Seraphim blockade. "I need the best," Hayes told her XO as they reviewed personnel files. Not conventional military. I need people who think differently. One by one, she selected her team. Lieutenant Marcus Kane, an ex-Special Forces operative with a genius for improvisational tactics. Dr. Sophia Chen, a xenopsychologist who specialized in non-human cognition patterns. Engineer Raj Kapoor, whose unorthodox modifications to standard technology had been deemed recklessly innovative by Starfleet Command. And communications specialist Zoe Wallace, whose understanding of alien communication systems bordered on the intuitive. These people have all been reprimanded for insubordination, her XO pointed out, scrolling through their files. Hayes smiled grimly. Exactly what we need. The Seraphim expect logical, predictable military responses. We're going to give them chaos. When assembled in the Defiance briefing room, the team represented humanity's last, desperate hope. Hayes didn't sugarcoat their situation. This is a long-shot mission with minimal chance of survival, she told them bluntly. But if we succeed, we save what's left of humanity, and possibly the galaxy. Dr. Patel has identified a primary Seraphim command node hidden in the asteroid belt. We need to infiltrate it and deploy his neural disruptor technology. A command node? Kane asked, his scared face thoughtful. You mean like a brain? More like a critical neural junction, Patel explained. The Seraphim process complex decisions through these nodes. Disrupt this one, and we could introduce a cascading failure across their entire network. Engineer Kapoor studied the schematics, his eyes narrowing. Standard approach won't work. But what if we modified the Shadow Blade's hull to mimic the Seraphim's biomechanical signature? They might recognize us as part of themselves. That's... Patel blinked in surprise. Actually, that could work. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression intense. I've been studying Seraphim behavior patterns. Their consciousness evolved in deep space. They have no concept of individual identity. We can use that against them. How? Hayes asked. By introducing contradictory information streams that force their collective to question its own perceptions, Chen explained. It's like inducing a form of schizophrenia in their network. And while they're confused, we slip in and hit them with the disruptor. Kane concluded with a predatory smile. For the next 18 hours, they worked without rest. Kapoor and his engineering team transformed the Shadow Blade into something barely recognizable as human technology. Patel and Chen fine-tuned the disruptor package, while Kane drilled his infiltration team on unconventional combat tactics. As Earth's remaining defense forces prepared for what would likely be their final stand, Hayes addressed her crew one last time before boarding the Shadow Blade. The Galactic Council believes humanity is too primitive to survive this threat, she told them, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched on her face. They've underestimated what humans do best: adapt, improvise, and overcome. The Seraphim are a perfect, unified intelligence, and that's their weakness. They've never encountered a species that thrives on chaos and contradiction the way we do. She looked at each member of her team, these brilliant misfits who represented humanity's unique approach to survival. Today, we show the galaxy why you should never corner a species that evolved as persistence hunters, Hayes concluded grimly. We don't just fight, we endure. And when conventional weapons fail, we change the rules of engagement. Operation Firestorm begins in 30 minutes. Prepare for launch. As the Shadow Blade detached from the Defiance docking bay and silently accelerated toward the heart of the Seraphim swarm, Captain Hayes felt a strange calmness settle over her. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and given up for dead by the advanced civilizations of the galaxy. But humanity had been counted out before. And each time, they had survived through sheer stubborn ingenuity. The Seraphim thought in terms of perfect order and mathematical precision. They were about to learn what happens when you face a species that had turned unpredictability into an art form. Humanity unleashed. The Shadow Blade drifted through the asteroid belt like a ghost, its modified hull pulsing with stolen Seraphim biosignatures. On the bridge, Captain Hayes watched the tactical display with calculated intensity as thousands of enemy vessels swarmed around them, oblivious to the human predator in their midst. Neural mimicry holding steady, Engineer Kapoor reported, his hands dancing across adaptive interfaces. They're registering us as another drone in their network. Dr. Chen monitored the Seraphim communication patterns, her expression intense. They're exchanging data packets with us. The system is automatically responding with the fragments we harvested from destroyed vessels. How long until they realize we're feeding them preset responses? Hayes asked. Impossible to say, Chen replied. Their cognitive architecture is extraordinarily complex, but eventually they'll notice the inconsistencies. Lieutenant Kane checked his tactical gear one final time. Then we move fast. My team is ready for ground insertion the moment we dock with the command node. The command node loomed ahead, a massive structure of biomechanical components twisted into impossible geometries. Unlike the smaller Seraphim vessels, this construct pulsed with an inner light that suggested a higher concentration of the collective's consciousness. Beginning final approach, announced the pilot, her voice tight with concentration. Docking protocols initiated. Hayes nodded to Dr. Patel. Begin Phase 1. Patel activated the first stage of their plan, a carefully crafted series of communication signals designed to introduce subtle inconsistencies into the Seraphim network. Not enough to trigger an alarm, but sufficient to create microscopic delays in their processing. Think of it as cognitive white noise, Patel had explained during mission planning. We're not jamming them. We're making them doubt their own perceptions. The shadow blade extended biomechanical docking tendrils that connected with the command node's outer membrane. The ship shuddered as the alien structure accepted them, pulling them into its massive body. We're in, the pilot confirmed. Established hard seal with the structure. Hayes turned to Kane and his infiltration team. You have 20 minutes to reach the central processing hub and deploy the disruptor. After that, we'll need to initiate emergency extraction, whether you're back or not. Kane nodded grimly. Understood, Captain. He turned to his team of 6 specialists. Remember, conventional weapons are last resort only. We move like ghosts. As the infiltration team departed through the airlock into the Seraphim structure, Hayes initiated the second phase of the operation. Dr. Chen, begin cognitive dissonance protocols. Chen activated a sequence of transmissions that would have appeared completely nonsensical to human observers. To the Seraphim collective, however, they represented something far more dangerous, contradictory information patterns that couldn't be reconciled within their unified consciousness. Inside the command node, Kane led his team through twisting corridors of living technology. The structure itself seemed to breathe, pulsing with energy that flowed through organic-looking circuitry. There were no Seraphim soldiers as humans would understand them. The entire structure was the enemy, alive and aware. Movement at 2 o'clock, whispered Specialist Rodriguez, indicating a section of wall that had begun to flow and reshape itself. Kane held up a fist, freezing the team in place. They had trained for this. The Seraphim collective could manipulate its physical structure, creating defensive mechanisms when it detected threats. But Dr. Chen's cognitive disruption was working. The wall formation hesitated, then receded. They're confused, Kane murmured. Keep moving. Back on the shadow blade, alarms suddenly blared across multiple stations. We've got a problem, Kapoor announced tensely. They're beginning to isolate the disruptive signals. Adaptive countermeasures are forming. Accelerate the protocol, Hayes ordered. We need to buy Kane more time. Chen increased the intensity of the cognitive disruption, while Patel monitored the Seraphim's responses. They're trying to compartmentalize, he reported, cutting off sections of their network to prevent the spread of our disruptive patterns. That's expected, Hayes replied. Initiate Phase 3. Phase 3 was their most audacious gambit, a massive burst of contradictory information that represented the equivalent of screaming nonsense directly into the Seraphim's collective mind. Not just noise, but carefully structured illogical constructs that the perfectly rational hive mind couldn't process. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the command node, systems began to fluctuate wildly as the collective struggled to maintain coherence. Kane and his team used the confusion to push deeper into the structure, finally reaching the central processing hub, a massive chamber filled with pulsing crystalline formations that served as the node's primary neural clusters. "Setting charges," announced tech specialist Lee, placing the neural disruptor devices at key junction points throughout the chamber. "Command, this is Kane," he transmitted. "Disruptors in place. Beginning final sequence." Suddenly, the chamber shuddered violently. Sections of wall liquefied and began forming into defensive structures. The Seraphim were adapting faster than anticipated. "They're isolating this section," Kane reported as crystalline barriers began forming around the team. "We're cut off from the extraction point." On the Shadow Blade, Hayes made an instant decision. "Kapoor, reroute all power to the mimicry systems. Patel, send the emergency override sequence. That will blow our cover completely," Patel warned. Phase 3 was their most audacious gambit, a massive burst of contradictory information that represented the equivalent of screaming nonsense directly into the Seraphim's collective mind. Not just noise, but carefully structured illogical constructs that the perfectly rational hive mind couldn't process. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the command node, systems began to fluctuate wildly as the collective struggled to maintain coherence. Kane and his team used the confusion to push deeper into the structure, finally reaching the central processing hub, a massive chamber filled with pulsing crystalline formations that served as the node's primary neural clusters. "Setting charges," announced tech specialist Lee, placing the neural disruptor devices at key junction points throughout the chamber. "Command, this is Kane," he transmitted. "Disruptors in place. Beginning final sequence." Suddenly, the chamber shuddered violently. Sections of wall liquefied and began forming into defensive structures. The Seraphim were adapting faster than anticipated. "They're isolating this section," Kane reported as crystalline barriers began forming around the team. "We're cut off from the extraction point." On the Shadow Blade, Hayes made an instant decision. "Kapoor, reroute all power to the mimicry systems. Patel, send the emergency override sequence." "That will blow our cover completely," Patel warned. "Do it," Hayes ordered. Now, the override sequence was their emergency option, a massive surge of conflicting data designed not to confuse, but to paralyze the Seraphim consciousness. For a few precious seconds, it would create a complete cognitive shutdown of the local network. Inside the processing hub, Kane watched as the forming barriers suddenly froze in mid-creation. "Whatever you did, it worked," he transmitted. "But we still can't get back to you. Too many blockages." "Activate the disruptors and find another way out," Hayes instructed. "We'll create a second extraction point." Kane nodded to Lee, who activated the disruptor sequence. The devices began pulsing with increasing intensity, interfacing directly with the Seraphim neural clusters. 15 seconds to full activation, Lee reported. The team moved to the far side of the chamber, searching for an alternate escape route. There, Rodriguez pointed to a pulsing conduit large enough for a person to traverse. "That connects to a secondary processing node. We might be able to reach the outer membrane from there." "Command, we're moving to alternate extraction," Kane transmitted. "Sending coordinates now." The Shadow Blade systems tracked their movement through the Seraphim structure. "We'll meet you there," Hayes confirmed. "The disruptor effect is beginning to cascade through their network. We don't have much time before this entire structure becomes unstable." Throughout the command node, the Seraphim Collective was experiencing something it had never encountered in its millennia of existence: cognitive fragmentation. Dr. Patel's disruptor wasn't destroying it in a conventional sense. It was forcing the perfect unity of the collective consciousness to break into competing, contradictory subminds. As Kane's team fought their way through increasingly chaotic internal defenses, the Shadow Blade detached from its original docking point and maneuvered to intercept them at the new extraction coordinates. "Structural integrity of the command node is failing," reported the pilot. "We've got maybe 3 minutes before catastrophic collapse." "Kane, status," Hayes demanded. "Almost there," came the strained reply. "2 casualties. Rest of team still operational." Outside the command node, the Seraphim fleet had begun to react to the attack, but their responses were uncoordinated and confused. Vessels moved in contradictory patterns, some attacking each other as the neural disruption spread through their network. "It's working," Dr. Chen breathed, watching the tactical display. "Their collective consciousness is fragmenting." The Shadow Blade's hull breached the command node's outer membrane at the extraction coordinates just as Kane and his remaining team members fought through the final obstacles. "I see you," Kane transmitted. "Coming in hot." 6 seconds. Hayes watched the external cameras as Kane and 3 surviving team members emerged from the dissolving structure and sprinted across the decaying biological surface toward the extraction point. "Brace for emergency acceleration," she ordered as they pulled the last team member aboard and sealed the airlock. The Shadow Blade pulled away from the disintegrating command node at maximum thrust, its stealth systems momentarily sacrificed for raw speed. Behind them, the massive Seraphim structure began to collapse in on itself, energy discharges erupting from multiple points. "Neural cascade is spreading throughout the fleet," Paddle reported, his voice filled with exhausted triumph. "The disruptor worked even better than I projected. They're not just confused, they're experiencing something like an existential crisis." On the tactical display, the Seraphim fleet had descended into chaos. Some vessels fled at random vectors, others turned on each other, while many simply drifted, inert and unresponsive. "Get us back to the Defiant," Hayes ordered, "and transmit everything we've learned to Earth Command and to the Galactic Council. I want them to see exactly what primitive humans just accomplished." 3 days later, Captain Hayes stood before a hastily convened session of the Galactic Council. The massive view screens showed the remnants of the Seraphim fleet, still fragmented and disorganized, unable to reconstitute their collective consciousness. "The neural disruptor cascade has permanently fractured their group mind," Hayes explained to the assembled alien representatives. "Individual vessels can still function, but they can no longer coordinate as a unified intelligence. The threat has been neutralized." High Counselor Zextrol's crystalline body shifted with colors that suggested reluctant respect. "The Council acknowledges humanity's unexpected success. Your species' approach was unorthodox and went against all established military doctrine. That's precisely why it worked," Hayes replied firmly. "You dismissed us as primitive because our technology hasn't advanced as quickly as yours. But technology isn't our greatest strength. It's our adaptability. Humans don't just use tools. We reimagine them. We don't just fight enemies. We understand them and find their psychological weaknesses." She looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of each council member. The Seraphim were perfect, a single unified mind that thought with absolute precision and logic. And that's exactly why they were vulnerable to a species like ours that thrives on contradiction, improvisation, and creative chaos. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just survived against impossible odds. They had succeeded where the advanced civilizations of the galaxy had failed, using methods that defied conventional understanding. "The Council will reconsider humanity's position in galactic affairs," Zextrol finally conceded. "Perhaps there is more to your species than we initially assessed." As Hayes left the chamber, she permitted herself a small smile. Humanity had been pushed to the brink of extinction, abandoned by the galaxy's supposed protectors, and faced with an enemy that should have been unbeatable. Instead, they had revealed the greatest strength of their species, the ability to turn apparent weaknesses into decisive advantages, to think in ways that no unified consciousness could predict or counter. The galaxy had just learned an important lesson. Never underestimate a species that had evolved to thrive in chaos and turn desperation into their most powerful weapon.